I start, I want to acknowledge the Cherokee land we stand on and the indigenous people that occupy this land now and before. I often wonder what my founding mothers would think of me, a lesbian migrant from El Salvador displaced by war. Taking this political street art I saw, growing up, carrying it with me until I felt it bloom, guiding me to utilize public art to send a message. I wonder how it is that I grew up to become a visual artist utilizing public space, or in simpler terms, a street artist. But when I reflect on it, I can see the answer so clearly. I was perfectly groomed for this, or rather, I was meant for this. I grew up in San Salvador in the early 90s with an abundance of violence during the aftermath of the Civil War at the time. I migrated to the US when I was 9, hand in hand with my aunt in a small book bag, holding a couple of toys, wearing my favorite Star Wars shirt. We landed into Washington Dulles. From that moment, my life changed. I came with no way to communicate and no knowledge that I would not go back home. I was forced to create a new normal without any say. I couldn't speak English, and it created a different kind of loneliness, a silent one. I taught myself English watching TV, watching Disney Channel and Nickelodeon with subtitles. I watched everything I could, desperately trying to understand the dialogue through body language and time. I don't remember how I did that now, teaching myself a language at such a young age, but I did. My eternal gratitude to Bear in the Big Blue House. No matter how much TV I watched, I never truly saw myself within the channels. I started questioning gender roles when I was around the same age. I used to go to the mall with my mom and beg her to put a coin in the construction ride truck in the food court. I would climb in with ideas instilled by movies and soap operas I watched in my household, convinced if I went to work, AKA performed masculinity, I would be allowed to have a wife instead of a husband. Notions being implied by my friends, my age, who were taught by their parents the limitations of a family unit, one binary of man and woman. I was replicating what I saw on TV. I was 13 when I came out because I got tired of it real quick. I didn't have the words then to what I know now, but I was being suffocated by heteronormativity. All of this to say, I'm not surprised I made a home out of the streets. And in making a home, I created a way to decorate those walls with large posters of queer people of color, political messages, and flamboyant portraits of our cultural ancestors adorned with synthetic floral arrangements, and by doing so, simultaneously playing my part in recreating the lens of street art. I've always known that I'm not entirely alone. I just had to figure out how I could talk to people loud enough to connect. I started my work because I have something to say. I created an Instagram to match and merge the physical streets with folks potentially interacting with my posters, therefore accomplishing my goal of creating space for myself and others. I like to remind people the streets are my platform. Social media is my mic. If you're like most people, you probably can't control the content of pages in magazines and storylines on current TV shows. This is a heteronormative world, and mainstream media doesn't let you forget it. Social media and who and what you follow is within your control. You have the ability to curate your feed to your image, to your interest, to your tailored self. If you're a queer person of color in the Gen Z and millennial category, I would bet that you've intentionally created this space for you. But if you haven't, let me tell you why you should consider doing so. There are universes filled with queer creatives, creating and archiving our very existence. You're worthy of a world in where you see yourself unapologetically. Miriam Wright Edelman says, "You can't be what you can't see." And I know that to be true. Queer folks don't usually grow up with overflowing examples on how to simply exist. Mainstream entertainment will have you believe queer folks don't exist, and if they do, we fall into certain binaries. When you don't see yourself in the most normal and simplest of ways, you begin to question your identity. You begin to question your place in a society that doesn't do you any service. Social media allows us to follow and keep up with each other. Essentially, it allows you to see yourself. I get messages from folks on Instagram thanking me for sharing my life and my experiences with them. I brushed it off thinking I'm just living my life, dismissing it, reducing it, until it hit me. I am the example to some that I wish I had when I was growing up. When I was a teenager, I wish I had seen a queer woman like me. Queer folks revolutionized their history by existing and choosing to do so publicly and openly is choosing yourself regardless of the consequences. It is the absolute rejection of heteronormative notions instilled in us from birth. It is doing what is socially independent. It is anti-colonial medicine, and it is a healing balm for our queer ancestral lines. Choosing to live your life so others can see is an act of privilege. I have always believed in the power of our queer community and the way it shapes society. There's 100% chance that you have been influenced or moved by queer visionaries. Visionaries are those who share their experiences through learning how to struggle and thrive within the same cycle. I see a world where queer youth have access to literature, film, music, and all mediums that reflect them without being othered. I want you to think of the last time you questioned why societal norms are set in place for us. Cis heteropatriarchy counts on us being absent-minded from the removal of binaries and restrictions to continue to reign over all of us. Cis heteronormativity isn't sustainable. It's performative and it is subjective. It is not the norm, it is the bare minimum. Queerness is a political and revolutionary identity, one who is filled with history. Queerness forms a lineage of ancestors regardless of biological family, embedded by society. As a queer person, you are part of a community that has resisted, organized, mobilized, and fought for their lives, not just survival, but more importantly, for your ability to share your joy. As a queer person, you are a continuance of that legacy. I fight and live for a future where queer kids are able to flourish as they are because we've given them the tools to, because we've built a world and where queer content isn't a scarcity, but a garden we tend to. There has never been a shortage of queers thriving, creating, taking up space, making families and strong connections. There is a shortage of queers in writing rooms, in boardrooms, in the White House, in power positions that sanction the livelihood of all of us. But I know we're on our way to destroying this normalcy. We're demanding more and continuing the work laid out for us on June 28th, 1969, by the brick of our ancestor who literally threw the stone of liberation. My vision of a queer culture where we not only celebrate queerness, but acknowledge queer folks for being inherently cultural makers doesn't seem so distant anymore. When you leave today, take this. Inherently for being here today, you have chosen action. Queer history is radical. I urge you to be a part of it, to live your life as you wish to write your pages with your pen in your heart and freedom in your ink. I urge you to step into your glory and liberate the parts of you that are easier to hide. If you're able to, if you feel safe enough to, I urge you to live as you're meant to. Queer joy is sacred. It's a sacred choice we must continue to make. Your existence is glorious. It is a practice of theory. Thank you so much.